Very good afternoon to everyone. Chairman, Board of Governors, IIM Calcutta, Shri Kulkarni ji. Director, IIM Calcutta, Professor Subir Bhattacharya ji. At IIM Kolkata, many of whom I still must address as professors because they taught me a couple of decades back, and I hold them in enormous esteem. Staff, alumni of IIM Calcutta, my really beloved juniors that are graduating this year, all the batches, including the PhD, MBA, Executive MBA, and the PGDBA, all juniors of mine, and most importantly, parents and relatives of all the graduating students. Firstly, let me, from the bottom of my heart, acknowledge what a true privilege it is for me to share some thoughts with my juniors. There can't be a better dream for any student to be able to share his or her thoughts at the convocation ceremony of his or her alma mater. So I first thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts, and thank the Almighty for having blessed me with so much grace. At this point in time, let me first start off by congratulating sincerely all the graduating students. It's a very important day for all of you. At the same time, let me make sure that I confirm that each one of you is healthy, staying safe, following all the protocols. Let us all join together for a moment, praying for the health of all the brothers and sisters of our country. Thank you very much. May I first request my juniors, graduating students, to, if possible, stand up, but if not, bow down in reverence to their parents and to their teachers. As the chairman very nicely remarked, our first encounter with divinity is through our parents. There cannot be another set of more indulgent well-wishers for us than our parents. So, from the bottom of your heart, bow down in reverence, thank your parents, because today, after this, come what may, you will be proud alums of IIM Calcutta. It's a phenomenal achievement, and without the enormous contribution that your parents would have made towards this, you certainly would not have been here. So bow down from the bottom of your heart and thank them for all that they've done and will continue to do in their lifetimes. Secondly, bow down in equal reverence to all the teachers, the outstanding faculty at IIM Kolkata, for having taught you what you're going to use as you step into the real world. In the Indian ethos, we've always said, Mata, Pita, Guru, Deva. So God comes after, Mata, Pita first, and then Guru. And that's the way we've always treated our elders, including our parents and our teachers. So I think it is our bounden duty to pay our respects to all the teachers and our parents who have actually made such outstanding contributions for where you are and where we are today. So that's the first order of the day. As an alum, I of course reminisce about where I was. I was sitting exactly where you were 22 years back. And so, as I mentioned, it is an incredible privilege. I just feel from the bottom of my heart that it's such a privilege to be able to share my thoughts with my juniors. I remember listening to Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia at the Convocation address. I was a resident of the old hostel, and therefore any memory of IIM Calcutta has to be associated with the jetty at near old hostel. I remember spending so many nights amidst the breeze that would come from the lake, amidst the stars that were looking down possibly, or maybe looking at us, with my batchmates debating all kinds of topics. Those topics that we debated don't mean much today, but that experience of having actually sat there passionately discussing those remains a wonderful memory. As I reminisce on my academic memories, I have goosebumps, literally, in some cases, when I think about some classes. Some of our professors were not just professors, they were artists at work. The clarity of thought, the mental organization of the topics that they had, the mesmerizing diction that they brought to the class, and most importantly, the enormous patience that they had to answer our queries were things that actually stand out, that even today, 22 years after, I can still remember some of those classes. Director sir talked about Professor Rahul Mukherjee. What a mentor, what a mentor. When I was a student at IIM Calcutta, his achievements as a scholar, as someone who actually stood in stature in the international community, as someone who plowed a lonely furrow, and yet did never ever actually bothered about incentives or ecosystems. His achievements remind us that for a person whose goals are very high, things like incentives, ecosystems, etc. do not matter. For human endeavor, in fact, all the restrictions that we have are all in our minds. Once these restrictions are gone, then there is nothing that stops us from achieving whatever we want. People like Professor Rahul Mukherjee and many other scholars have been enormous inspiration for me as I myself pursued the path of a teacher and a scholar. So I bow down to all of them for having actually inspired me so much to pursue a path that they themselves follow. I'm going to share with you a perspective that I draw from my vantage point. This is a vantage point that combines my background and my education and the experiences that I've had. I come from a very humble background, a lower middle class family where I was the first person to enter college ever, across all generations. I was born and brought up in a traditional Tamil family where the depth of the Indian culture, the Indian ethos was mentioned to us. And therefore, I grew up appreciating all the wonderful nuances that Indian ethos, Indian culture provides. My father used to carry a pocket Bhagavad-Gita always with him. And the few times when I would actually just open to see what he did with that, I would see that just about every shloka was underlined and was scribbled upon. He used to tell us to read the Bhagavad-Gita at that young age. Me and my brother, just two siblings, we of course never followed that advice of his when we were young. But as we grew older, the profoundness of what he was mentioning grew upon us and thereby actually motivated us to go and search for that treasure that he himself found from having that Bhagavad-Gita with him. My father was not, did not go to college, but was a voracious reader. He would recite verbatim shlokas from Tirukkural by Saint Tiruvalluvar. He would recite verbatim the poems of Subramanian Bharati, with such passion. At that time, of course, as young, we used to be a little astounded at the same time, but also surprised at his passion. But as we grew older and some maturity came to us, then that passion that we displayed made us go and search for that treasure with which, that's what led to that passion. And that, that search led us as well to go and read the scriptures, read the literature that India has to offer in its native language. So that's one part of me that actually really, is part of my vantage point. At the same time, I have had the privilege and there isn't a moment when I don't thank the Almighty for having given me such opportunities to have studied at the best educational institutions that this country and the world has to offer, be it in the natural sciences or in the social sciences. I also had the opportunity to live for a decade in another country in the United States and thereby assimilate their culture. And so what I'm going to talk to you today about is some lessons on leadership, where I will try and assimilate ideas, brilliant ideas that I've gathered from reading of Indian literature and Indian scriptures, but using that by combining it with the methodological rigor that Western education has provided me. I've often found that combining these ideas provided by the Indian ethos with the rigor that Western education has provided has lent credibility and depth to these thoughts. And hopefully I will be able to share the same with you all. This is not a class in economics for sure, and I'm not going to bore you with economics concepts, but it will be useful for me to just quickly refer to a few concepts that I will employ in talking about the leadership lessons. The model that classical economics has for an individual is that of homo economicus, a self-interested individual that maximizes his or her utility, oftentimes measured purely in money. Rational choice, which is that individuals make decisions to maximize their utility. But I want to introduce a nuance here that rational choice could be myopic or could be visionary. Both of them are rational enough. When you make choices to just maximize your utility over just a short run, that could just be this particular interaction or maybe this particular job, then you're making a myopic choice versus utility maximization over the entire over the entire lifetime. That's a visionary choice, and that's a second paradigm of rational choice. A third important idea that you all will encounter, I'm sure, in your lives is the problem of commons. This is always a story that involves three characters: everybody, somebody, and nobody. If everybody thinks that somebody else should follow traffic rules, but I will not, then nobody follows traffic rules and you get a traffic snarl. That's the problem of commons for you. And finally, the idea of Nash equilibrium versus Pareto optimality. Just rejig the prisoner's dilemma game that you must have been taught in your economics classes, where that prisoner's dilemma from the Nash equilibrium is representative of uncoordinated action that results from pure self-interest. In contrast, Pareto optimality is one where everybody is better off with nobody being worse off. And that is another idea that is quite important for us to keep in mind. Given that you guys are all graduating, you guys and gals are graduating amidst unprecedented times, an unprecedented pandemic, I think it is very, very important to actually take important lessons that this pandemic is offering us. As I mentioned, the COVID pandemic is one that brilliantly illustrates, or maybe illustrates in a very, very drastic manner the problem of commons. Because if everybody thinks that somebody else should follow behavior that is consistent with with COVID protection protocols, but if everybody thinks that somebody else should do it, I will not do it, then nobody follows that, and then the outcome is paid by us all, and that the pandemic rages. So the problem of commons is actually quite well illustrated by COVID, because this is a time where if everyone is not safe, no one is safe. And I think this is an idea that is brilliantly captured by this really liberal idea that is mentioned in the Hitopadesh and in the Maha-Upanishads, which goes as Ayam nijaha paro veti ganana ladhu chetasam udara charitanam tu vasudhaiva kutumbakam. It's such a brilliantly liberal idea. Ayam nijaha paro veti. Somebody is mine, someone else is not mine. Ganana ladhu chetasam. This kind of calculation is actually something that the petty-minded do. In contrast, udara charitanam, those who actually display large-heartedness, udara charitanam tu vasudhaiva kutumbakam. They think about everybody as a family. And this is an important idea that all of us must take, because this idea is not consistent with this concept of a homo economicus, just somebody is purely self-interested, because the pandemic has illustrated to us that we must be thinking about humans as at least homo reciprocus, which is that somebody, just the fact that if you do not follow COVID appropriate behavior, then you are putting your neighbor at risk. Similarly, if the neighbor does not exhibit COVID appropriate behavior, he's putting you at risk as well. And this is the homo reciprocus idea that we must think about. But at the very least, we must think about the homo reciprocus idea. But this idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is even bigger, and we can think about, and I'm coining a term, homo altruitus, which is this, displaying altruistic behavior, which very eloquently both the director and the chairman of the board talked about, that we must be caring about actually all the people who are affected. This is captured brilliantly by the Bhagavad-Gita, chapter 3, shloka 21, goes as Yat Yat Acharati Sreshtataha Tat Tat Evetaro Janaha Sayat Pramanam Kunte Lokas Tat Anuvartate. Yat Yat Acharati Sreshtataha. Sresht. You are such privileged people that, among many lakhs of people, a few hundred have actually gotten this privilege to actually be called an IIM alum. If you are not privileged, I don't think there's anybody else in this world who is privileged. So, Yat Yat Acharati Sreshtataha. You are Sresht. Indeed, remember that. Never forget that. Yat Yat Acharati Sreshtataha. Acharan, behavior, the way you behave. Yat Yat Acharati Sreshtataha Tat Tat Evetaro Janaha. Others will actually look up to your behavior and follow. But not just talk. Sayat Pramanam Kurute. Praman, proof of behavior. Sayat Pramanam Kurute Lokas Tat Anuvartate. So keep that responsibility. Along with privilege always comes responsibility. There are two sides of the same coin. If we behave as homo reciprocus, then we don't need to think about responsibility separately, because homo reciprocus means that we behave in a manner that not only helps us but protects others as well, the community and the society. This is a very important idea that all of us must remember. Now, even Western economic ideas, and many oftentimes forget, but if you go and read Adam Smith's work, he talks about that the invisible hand of the market should be used for reasonable satiation of human greed. The word reasonable there is incredibly important, and something that has actually been forgotten. In the 1980s, the New York Times had actually titled an article, "Greed is Good." Can't be, that can't be farther from Adam Smith's, he would have been turning in his grave at actually seeing that particular caption, and that being attributed to Adam Smith. So, this idea of Udara Charitam, that large-heartedness, where we not only focus just on ourselves, the I, me, myself, instead displaying homo reciprocus behavior is incredibly important. And as you go and work in the real world, this large-hearted behavior will actually help you become leaders. And that's where I want to actually share, because this is your day, and you will today the lessons that you learn, hopefully some of these that some of us are talking about, you'll hold them and actually implement them over your careers. So First, let's take the job that you've gotten in campus. I'm sure many of you have gotten wonderful jobs. I go back to the time when in our batch, many of us had gotten jobs, not necessarily jobs on day zero, but the consulting or the investment banking companies that everyone else usually thought was the dream job to have. But here, if you actually display that large-heartedness, that Udara Charitam, first to yourself, let's apply that idea to yourself. You will realize that it is not about getting that cool job that everybody else thinks is most important. It is about getting the job that you will be happy the most about. That is what is the most critical. And here I will borrow from a wonderful simile that my mentor, Professor Raghuram Rajan, shared when he gave his convocation address to his alma mater at IIM Ahmedabad. He gave this simile. Think about, you are maybe 15, 20 years later, you are going to work. You are seated in the car of your choice. Take your pick. Could be a BMW, Merc, whatever it is. Take your pick. But you're not looking forward to get to work. You're dreading what the day has in store for you. That's one side. Another side, you're getting up in the morning, wanting to get to work. You are looking forward to what the day has in store for you, even though you are going in a dilapidated bicycle, possibly, or maybe walking to work. Now, picture these two scenarios and think about where are you happy and what should be the choice that you should be making. Eventually, all our choices are made because we want to be happy. In the first scenario, everybody else thinks you are happy, but you are not happy. In the second scenario, everybody else may think that you are a loser, but what do you care? You are happy. And you want to live life not by the definition that someone else provides for your happiness, but by the definition that you lay out for your happiness. That is what is the most critical. Here, a person that I'm a really big fan of, Rahul Dravid. When Rahul Dravid retired, he wrote an article in Cricinfo that has actually stuck to me so beautifully. Dravid talked about how when he used to go on tours, he would come back and then meet his friends from college. They would all be talking about their own lives, and usually they would be cribbing about their particular jobs and saying that we do these jobs only to put food on the table for us or to take care of our families. And Rahul Dravid admitted that at that time when I used to hear my friends talking about this, I used to feel so privileged that I am able to earn my bread by doing something that I am so passionate about. And that is the thought that I want to leave you with, that it is first aspect of large-heartedness, the Udara Charitam, is to actually look for what you're passionate about. Because we all spend close to 8 to 10, 12 hours a day at work, typically 70, 80 hours a week at work. And if you're not happy doing that, then maybe you're actually in the wrong area. And think about that. You may not have actually hit your passion right now. Many of us in our batch did not necessarily hit our passion in our very first jobs. We had to actually look for our second or third jobs when we found our passion. But you have to keep looking at that. Do not put the cart before the horse. The horse here is the learning. The cart is your career. If you strengthen that horse, keep learning and keep looking for what you're passionate about, the cart will automatically run at good speed. As Alan Border, the Australian cricket captain, is supposed to have said to young cricketers, take care of the runs, the dollars will take care of themselves. Similarly, you take care of your learning, your career will take care of itself. You look for your passion, your career will take care of itself. So that's the first aspect of large-heartedness, Udara Charitam, that I would want you to display. At the same time, also feel happy for all your batchmates, because remember, you are eventually a family. The 34th batch that I am part of, that batch is my family. And believe it or not, So many of my batchmates have done so incredibly well, and I have now benefited in this particular role from them doing well, because I reach out to them for policy advice on many aspects, and they are more than liberal with the time that with their time and with their inputs. So, when your batchmates will do well, in many unfathomable ways, you will find you also doing well. So keep that idea of the homo reciprocus about your batch as a family, and really feel happy for each one of your friends, that doing well. As you step out of campus, the next phase that will dawn upon you is the first decade of your career. Here you will get into many jobs, and the first thing that you'll realize as you go and work in a company, in an organization, is that every activity is done in a team. That teamwork is incredibly important when you're working in an organization. You may have this tendency sometimes to go and claim credit for small things that you may have done, or sometimes even possibly claiming credit for things that you may not have done. What my advice to you as your senior, as someone who's actually lived what I'm talking about, is to resist that temptation. Try and again bring that Udara Charitam, that large-heartedness, that eventually when you do good work, the recognition will come to you. You do not have to necessarily go and keep looking for credit. Because reputation that is acquired, either positive or negative, often travels. You may think that it does not travel, but it indeed does. And so if you acquire the reputation of someone who's large-hearted, who actually contributes, then you will indeed you will find yourself benefiting in ways that are completely unfathomable. Here again, I cannot but draw from the example of Rahul Dravid. I'm sure many of you, I don't know whether you followed cricket in the 2000s, but I certainly did. Rahul Dravid was such a wonderful deputy to Sourav Ganguly. In the 2003 World Cup, so that the team could have balance, he decided to don gloves. And those who have played cricket will actually understand that if you are the wicket keeper, across 300 deliveries, you have to get up and go down. You have to do at least 300 sit-ups in a day, if not more, and then come and bat maybe for 10, 12, 30, 40 overs. That requires enormous amounts of stamina and enormous amounts of hard work to actually equip yourself for that. So Rahul Dravid actually is such a wonderful example for somebody who was always willing to actually contribute without asking whether he was getting the credit or not. There was a time when for instance, if you take the Kolkata innings of his, BVS Lakshman was the one who actually got all the credit, even though Rahul Dravid was as critical in that famous partnership at Kolkata, no other place than Kolkata. But Rahul Dravid never ever actually flinched or said, "Oh, why am I not getting credit?" Today, I'm sure many of you, when you watch IPL and you see that ad, and when Rahul Dravid says, "Main Indira Nagar ka gunda hu," we all laugh. Why? Because he is such a wonderful character, and this is just a human tendency to admire people with fantastic virtues. So keep that example in mind of Rahul Dravid. So that's one key aspect, which is display that large-heartedness when you go and work in teams, contribute, and the recognition will indeed come to you. A second aspect that is really important here, and here I want to bring in the concept of Nash equilibrium, which is that if you behave in a manner that is not very trustworthy, then you will beget behavior that is not trustworthy. At the same time, if you behave in a way that actually engenders trust, then you will get such behavior as well. That is the Nash equilibrium. Now, the the beauty of the Nash equilibrium is that you can use that to rationalize staying in that Nash equilibrium for all kinds of reasons. You can keep saying, oh, everybody else behaves in a certain manner, and that is what leads me to behave in that particular manner, in which case everybody will be stuck in that Nash equilibrium and displaying behavior that is consistent with the Homo economicus, not the Homo reciprocus or the Homo altruist. And one of the key aspects that I'm sure you've learned in economics, that there is always a trade-off. If you choose to actually pay some price, some costs in looking for behavior that is Pareto optimal, and that is what leadership is about. You make that first move to behave in a trustworthy manner. Mark my words, you will get other people behaving in the same way, reciprocating in that same way. That is what leadership is about. A lot of normal people will behave in the way that leads to the Nash equilibrium. Statesmanship or leadership is getting away from that crowd and looking and demonstrating behavior that leads to Pareto optimality and generates the reciprocation from others for your good behavior. That's what leadership is about, when you will be working in the organizations that you'll be part of. Here, there's a subtle point that I want to actually mention here. There's a story that I read which is so wonderful, because oftentimes many of us view other people from different prisons. So this story is of a new couple who moves to a home, and every morning at about 9 o'clock or so, the husband and wife are sitting together to have chai together. The wife keeps remarking, saying, looks outside and sees the clothes that are put by their neighbor. The wife keeps remarking that, oh, looks like this woman, our neighbor does not wash clothes very well at all. Keeps remarking. The husband, cannot say much because he doesn't have that much knowledge. On a Sunday, they again sit down to have tea. And then the woman looks outside and remarks that, oh, looks like today our neighbor has washed the clothes really well. On hearing that, the husband remarks, no, my dear, I actually cleaned our window. So the fact that the earlier the woman was finding those clothes not very wet or not very clean was because she was looking through a window that actually had dust in it, the prism was a dirty prism. But when the prism got cleaned, she was able to see that the clothes actually were indeed being washed well. This may be a very small story, but illustrates a very important feature that all of us must keep in mind, that the way we see our prism, oftentimes we may be enforcing that prism on others. There's a wonderful story in the Bhagavatam that I want to relate here. So this story is about from the Mahabharata. Sri Krishna asks Yudhishthira and Duryodhana to go down. He calls Yudhishthira and says, Yudhishthira, you go to town and find one person who is not good. He then calls Duryodhana and asks Duryodhana, go to the same town at the same time and find one person that is good. Both people come back. They actually, if you go to the same town for the same duration, Yudhishthira comes back and says, I did not find a single person who was bad. Duryodhana comes back, looks at the same people and says, I did not find a single person who is good. I think the same lesson that we gather from the story of the husband and the wife and those clothes is also true in this story, that oftentimes the perspective with which we are looking is what we may find. So be very, very careful about the perspective with which you are looking at others. If you start off with the perspective that others can be trusted, then you will be far more inclined to display trustworthy behavior. But in contrast, if you start off by saying nobody else can be trusted, then you will be far more inclined to display behavior that is not very trustworthy, and you will be stuck in that Nash equilibrium. You will not be able to move to a Pareto optimal behavior, which leadership demands. One more important lesson when you are in your first decade, I think, which is incredibly important, is that of learning from your mistakes. I want to use one more example from cricket here. I don't know how many of you have had the chance to watch the 2003 World Cup final and the 2011 World Cup final. I had the pain of watching the 2003 World Cup final and the incredible pleasure of watching the 2011 World Cup final as well. But what I want to talk to you about here is Zahir Khan's bowling in the 2003 final and the 2011 final. How many of you know that Zahir Khan bowled 3 maidens in the 2011 final? His first 3 overs were all maidens. He did not give a single run. This was the same guy who actually gave 13 runs in his very first over in the 2003 World Cup final. In fact, his very first delivery was so wide that Rahul Dravid could not catch and it went for 5 byes. And the rest, as they say, was history. The rest was history in a positive way, even in the 2011 World Cup final. This demonstrates how well Zahir Khan learned from his mistakes. You know, none of us is perfect. We're all human. But when we keep admitting our mistakes and then learn from that, that is something that enables us to grow as human beings and thereby contribute better to the organizations. Once your first decade is over, in the second decade, most of you will get into leadership positions. Here, the qualities that you have acquired in the first decade, of course, will be important, but there will be other very important qualities that you'll have to acquire as leaders. And here again, let me use another example from cricket, but an example that Bengalis would love to hear about, Saurav Ganguly, Dada. If you look at what was that brilliant quality of Saurav Ganguly, he had the ability to spot talent. If you look at Harbhajan Singh, VVS Lakshman, you look at Virendra Sehwag, Yuvraj Singh, you name, all of these are people who actually really grew during Dada's time. Dada was so successful in going and conquering teams outside of India because of the wonderful team that he built. He built that team because he could spot talent, and not only spot talent, then back them. I think this is a very important quality that you will have to actually display as leaders, because you will be only as good or as bad as the teams that you lead. And so being very careful about the kind of people you choose for your team is very, very important. So try and develop that knack for talent. And here, not just in cricket, but even in organizations, I would say both capability and temperament are incredibly important. Capabilities are of course necessary, but what is really important is also temperament. The ability to fight, the ability to actually think clearly amidst a crisis is also something that you should be looking for in your folks. Someone like a Harbhajan Singh, who was ready to go to Canada to drive trucks, but then fights and gets 32 wickets in that famous 2001 series. That's the kind of person that you want in your team as well. You want the VVS Lakshman who will actually give you the best performance ever, that 281 and that's the kind that actually made Dada a successful leader. But of course, do remember that Dada not only picked them, but also showed faith in them. When they failed as well, he went and actually cajoled them and said, you are capable. And that is something that is very important for a leader to do. A second key aspect when you will become a leader, and this is, and having seen across organizations, I say it with a lot of import. Be secure in yourself so that you are able to hold on to those people who have the courage to criticize you. If there is someone who has the ability to criticize you, to tell you things that you need to hear, not just things that you want to hear, hold on to such people like gold dust. As Kabir used to say, Nindak niyare rakhiye, angan kuti chhabaye, bin pani sabun bina, nirmal kare suhai. So this is something which is so important. Kabir's doha of actually bin pani sabun bina, nirmal kare suhai. That is what a critic can do. It keeps you honest. And I've myself seen as well decisions that are arrived at when they get criticized and then refined through criticism are much better decisions. So hold on to those people who have the courage to be able to speak truth to authority. Such people are like gold dust. Make sure never lose those team members. This is something that really hold you in good stead. An important attribute as a leader that you will face is that you will inevitably encounter crises like the ones that we are facing now. And at that point in time, you will have to actually think ab initio. All the concepts that you've learned today, you will have to use that. Think about theory as actually as an abstraction of reality. It helps you to think better, but do not just throw baby with the bathtub. Use theory, but also recognize the limitations. So learn to think ab initio, which will be very important as a leader. As a leader, you will have to prioritize, because we all have 24 hours, and making sure that you really list down the most important things that you want to get done. If you're the CEO who has a tenure of 5 years, then just write down the 3 things or maybe the 5 things that you want to do in that 5 years. If it's a 3-year period, maybe 3 things that you want to get done, and put all your energies there. That is something which is extremely important. Finally, especially in your second decade, when you will get a lot of success, the most important thing that I want to tell you is be grounded. A lot of us, especially from institutions like that, IIMC, that privileged people, can oftentimes that success can get to our heads. I think this is really the most important thing that I would ask you to keep in mind. There is nothing more obnoxious than encounter a person who's actually, to whom success has gotten to his or her head. So make sure that you actually, at that time, if you start feeling too big, then look at someone who actually would have achieved more. You will inevitably find, for every person who has achieved X, there will be someone who will have achieved X plus Y. So look at that person and become grounded, because the last thing that we want all our IIMC students is to behave as if they are God's gift to humanity. None of us is God's gift to humanity. Let's be very, very clear about that. Once you finish your second decade, you will get into the third decade, when you will get into advisory positions. You will be possibly on boards. You may be advising big people, and so at that time a different set of qualities will become very important. And here I want to especially talk about the importance of crises and transformation, and the political economy of change. How do you bring about that in an organization? Whenever you think about change pits 2 sets of stakeholders. One stakeholder that is benefiting from the current status quo, and those that actually will benefit from change pits against each other. Typically, the stakeholders that are benefiting from status quo will be vocal, voluminous, and will have their voice heard. In contrast, those that will benefit from change may be disenfranchised, may not be able to express their voice. But here's where you have to recognize the importance of actually being able to do the right thing. And here I want to draw a parallel between 2 wonderful sets of documents that at some point I would urge you to lay your hands on and read: the Bhagavad-Gita and the Ashtavakra Gita. A lot of us have heard about the Bhagavad-Gita for sure. There's another Gita which is called the Ashtavakra Gita. This is a conversation that happens between Raja Janak and Ashtavakra. Ashtavakra, as the Sanskrit names suggest, Ashta is 8, Vakra is basically bent. So he was bent at eight places. He was born bent. There's a story to it, of course, which I'll not go into. But this is a conversation that happens between King Janaka in his kingdom, when he's actually having, running matters of state. There's enormous prosperity at that time, actually, and that this conversation about the ultimate truth happens. Contrary to that, the Bhagavad-Gita is set in a situation of war, strife, and the same knowledge being imparted. So 2 very different situations: prosperity in the Ashtavakra Gita and war and strife in the Bhagavad-Gita, but important knowledge, same knowledge being imparted across these two situations, which has a very important learning for our current times as well, that you learn to do the right thing in times of peace and at times of strife. There's a more important learning that you have to keep in mind, and that comes from the Bhagavad-Gita. If you recall, one of the key messages that Sri Krishna gives to the Pandavas is to go and conquer the Kauravas. And who are these Kauravas? These are representations of those that are vested interests, those that are only thinking about themselves, who are behaving in the homo economicus way, not necessarily in the homo reciprocus or homo altruitus way, who are basically just trying to think in a I, me, myself way. So what Sri Krishna says is that if you have to bring change, Pandavas, you, in the interest of society, you go and conquer these Kauravas. And I think in change, recognizing this political economy of change, it is inevitable that some of these vested interests will have to be conquered if you have to bring important change, in society. And that is something that when you have spent 2 decades and you have become, privileged enough to be able to advise or actually carry out this change, then doing that right thing is incredibly important. Here, there is this wonderful shloka that comes in the Bhagavad-Gita again, chapter 18, shloka 78. This is not a shloka that is either said by Arjuna or said by Krishna. This is Sanjaya, the charioteer to Dhritarashtra. He says, Sanjaya uvacha, yatra yogeshwara krishno, yatra partho dhanurdaraha, tatra shri vijayo bhutir dhuvani tirmatir mama. What he's saying is, where there is Yogeshwara or wisdom, the concept for wisdom, where there is wisdom, yatra Yogeshwara Krishna, yatra partho dhanurdaraha, where there is unwavering focus. Arjuna symbolizes unwavering focus. Where there is wisdom and where there is unwavering focus, and the wisdom of actually thinking not just for yourself, but thinking for society, thinking for your community, of not being homo economicus, but being homo reciprocus at least, or definitely, if you can, homo altruitus. That wisdom, together with unwavering focus for doing the right thing, then prosperity, righteousness, all that will indeed come, and I have no doubt about that. This is Sanjaya, a charioteer, saying this to his employer, or Dhritarashtra, saying the right thing. This is as important when you actually rise to power positions where you give advice. Say the right thing. Have the courage to be able to say the right thing. But of course, say it, in all as polite a way as possible, but learn to say the right thing. So I wish you all the very best. During this, you are graduating amidst unprecedented times, but the lessons that you can learn from this pandemic can really serve you in your entire careers. And as is the practice, whenever we start something that is when we start an important journey, it's always is befitting to remember Lord Ganesha. So I will end with a shloka to Lord Ganesha. Ajam nirvikalpam nirakaram ekam, ajam nirvikalpam nirakaram ekam, niranandam anandam advaita purnam, param nirgunam nirvishesham niriham, parabrahma rupam ganesham bhajema, parabrahma rupam ganesham bhajema, parabrahma rupam ganesham bhajema. May Lord Vigneshwara shower his choicest blessings so that your life is without any obstacles and you live life like a king or a queen. Thank you very much.